Anyway, I'll kick things off as people join throughout. So obviously, hi and welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining us for our first virtual BIboss of Lockdown 2.0. I'm Dom, and personally, I specialise in recruiting into the BI sector for Qualcomm, mainly across the northwest, but touch on the Yorkshire area as well. Obviously, you've heard Martin's voice as we've just been speaking, waiting for people to come in. But Martin is the director of analytics at Pets at Home, and I've been speaking to him for about the past 6 months. So he's been one of my best mates through lockdown, I suppose. And we've been discussing his experiences of hiring, keeping, and developing talent throughout his career, and whether it's important to actually focus on the technical traits versus the behavioural traits for analysts and developers within his team. And we also want to look at how COVID has actually changed that approach as well. So as always, feel free to ask questions in the chat box below. Martin possibly will answer those questions throughout the presentation, so do bear with him, but we do have time at the end to run through those. So without further ado, I'll pass you on to Martin.
Thanks very much, Dom. Yeah, as Dom said, I'll try to answer some questions in the piece, but if that gets a bit tricky, I'll answer them at the end. The presentation's just called Building the Best Analytics Team in the Pet Care Industry, and that's taken straight from one of my objectives in my role. That's one of the things I've been tasked to do, pardon me, when I joined Pets just over 12 months ago. So my role is Director of Advanced Analytics, which is a title that basically means data science when you don't want to call the team data science, because they do a few bits of other stuff as well. So I kind of look after a combination of data science and customer insight. So as Dom said, what I'm going to talk about is how we've gone about building the team. I joined it 12 months ago working for our CDO, who'd been in place at around 6 months. So we were taking a team from half a dozen internal people and growing that to the chief data office function is now 50 people. My team's about 25, 26 of those. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the skill sets we look for, how we, I believe, are retaining and developing people and what's important within that context. And as Dom said, a bit of how COVID may be affecting that. Sorry, it won't be a moment. Just went a bit dry there, I do apologise. So, I guess first up, why is data and analytics, why do Pets at Home want to build the best pet care team, best analytics team in the pet care industry? I think it comes back to something a lot of people will have seen, which is we've really bought into, it's the era of big data, and big data needs statisticians. Those who can use data well will win. And I love the quote from Google from Schmidt and Rosenberg: data is the sword of the 21st century, those who wield it well, the samurai. This is the bit where kind of my wife usually reminds me that I'm not to try to pretend to swish a samurai sword about on the grounds I look far more like Kung Fu Panda than a samurai, but at least I'm not on the stage, so the temptation isn't too great. The question that comes from that is then, well, kind of what makes a data samurai organization? And I think there's three key things. And this is taken from a report IBM did called The Battle for Personalized Loyalty. And it looks at who's going to win, what will be the defining factors of organizations that will win in retail over the next 5 or 10 years. And they split out three key factors. Sorry. One is who has access to the most data. And I slightly disagree with them on this, because I think it's who's got access to the best data. Yes, you need quantity, but you certainly need quality as well. Who has the ability to garner insight and act on the data, and who can execute best at moment of truth, who can really use those insights to make a difference for the organization and the consumer. And any one of those three could take an hour to talk about on themselves, on their own. This one very much concentrates on the second, which is that how do you generate and garner insight and act on it? Well, you need a team. That's the bit where the team comes in to take that data and build insights. And the problem we've been wrestling with for probably 10 years in most organizations is there just isn't enough samurai. There's a shortage of people with the right skill sets. So you then start to get into what does that look like for pets? So within pets, we are looking to build an analytics capability that will create value for the business by three things, really. Delivering impactful, relevant, and timely insight, increasing the effectiveness of our loyalty activity and customer experience journeys. We've around 7 million very important pet loyalty program scheme members, and we look after about 24 million pets within that context. In addition, we have vet businesses and vet practices within a lot of our stores. So around 400 of our shops have a vet in them. And we also have grooming facilities within stores and groom rooms as well. So we're really trying to leverage data science to optimize not just the retail performance, but things like supply chain, customer spend, workload, colleague rotas, which has been particularly relevant during the summer, pricing, next best action, and vet practice profitability. Even at the far extreme of our ambition is to try to use things like artificial intelligence to help with diagnostics in the vet practices if we can. So there isn't really a limit on where we might want to go with this. But to do this, we need to build a team. And we need a combination of skills. So we know we need people with experience in customer loyalty and digital analytics. We need data scientists, we need BI developers, we need data engineers. And the first thing we really realized was that wasn't going to be one standard job description. The whole myth of a data science unicorn, we knew we couldn't fetch that and we had to build a team. So we started by doing something which was a very different way of recruiting to a lot of organizations have done, and which has driven most recruitment agencies absolutely mad. I'm sure most of them hate me. Because we didn't produce job descriptions, we set a budget, we had a vague idea of how many people, and we went out to look for people who had a passion for pet care, a passion for analytics, a passion for retail, and asked, if you've got skills in any of these areas, come and talk to us. We might have a role. And we basically went looking for talent, and then we thought we'll figure out exactly how and what formation we want that talent to play in once we've seen what's available and who's right for us as a business. So it was a far more flexible process. I think what I found in a lot of organizations, once you start to get to it's exactly this many people and exactly this job description with exactly these skills, you start to leave some candidates either don't apply because they've not quite got them, or you miss some candidates at screening who would be great at 80% of what you want and don't have 20. Well, find a different candidate that's got the other 20. We can balance it. It'll be okay. We'll have to tailor that as we get to the stage of having a more definitive headcount. But for the early part of the journey, we tried to be really flexible. So who was the perfect candidate? Who did we really go after looking for? I think the big thing we did differently, again, to a number of people, was we saw technical as a necessary but not sufficient condition, if you pardon the bad maths gag. Lots of job adverts for analysts, pardon me, are very, very dull. They start with this long list of technical programming languages you need, a long list of algorithms you need to understand, and basically they're dreary. They're also lousy from a diversity and inclusion process because most of the teams I've led have had a probably about a 50-50 balance of male-female, which is unusual in analysis and IT. And one of the reasons for that is there's a lot of HR research that says, if you show somebody a job description with 12 things that somebody must do, then female candidates are very biased towards wanting to do all 12 before they'll apply for the role, and they want to be confident they've all the skills. Males are far more likely to look and think, I can do 8, I can learn the other two of them before interview, and I'll blag it on the other 2. So it does actually distort the gender balance of applicants as well. And so we approached it from a slightly different angle of really trying to work out what skills did we actually need to enter the team, and to try to move away a little bit from that technical bias. Because we looked at just how complicated it is. If you look online and say, what skills does a data scientist need? Sorry, pardon me. You get all sorts of these sort of personas, and they range from the good, the bad, to the indifferent. The one on the right is one of the more complicated ones I've seen, and it's in a way I should remember who did it and credit it, but in a way I probably shouldn't because I don't like it. It's nicked off the Moscow Underground, if you're wondering what the pattern is. But it talks about all the skills that a data scientist needs under text mining, data wrangling, data munging, visualization, machine learning fundamentals, statistics, big data, and programming. It's horrendous. It's a massive list. Even if you look at the more simple one on the left, that's far more typical than it talks about needing skills in maths and statistics, programming and database languages, communication and visualization, and domain knowledge. As a slight aside, I don't really agree. I'm a bit of a skeptic on domain knowledge, which I realize is heresy to a few people. I actually, and this is partly because I've worked in credit cards, retail, pharmacy, pet care, and plumbing and drainage, and in terms of companies I've worked for. And I think it's less about domain knowledge and do you need to recruit people who understand your industry. It's more to me about consulting skills. I've worked with lots of people from the likes of McKinsey, Wyman's, Accenture over the years. And if you look at their junior guys that they send in, what they're very good at is about talking to people, interviewing them, and very quickly getting to grips with what goes on and what's the drivers in the business. And you need people who've got that sort of consultancy skills and that mindset to go find the domain experts and dredge the knowledge out of their brain and then come up with something they need. But that's a little bit of a different skill to actually needing to be an expert yourself. As I said, that's a slight aside. I think my main point on this one is I looking at it, started to think about Malcolm Gladwell's book, Mastery. And Gladwell, for anybody who's not read him, he's the guy who sort of come up with a theory about why the Beatles were an overnight success in the early 60s. And his logic was they were an overnight success because they'd spent 10,000 hours gigging in Hamburg learning their craft, which then enabled them to effectively master what they do. And Gladwell's theory is you need about, to truly master something, you need about 10,000 hours of doing the thing to master it. Even if you look at the list on the left, that would take 21.3 years. If you take the look on the list on the right, I'd rather just give up, find the Central Line underground map and just go on the Central Line pub crawl. It's an awful list to try to get your head round. And you can look and think, how does that work in practice? So this is data from one part's from a KD Nugget survey in 2018-19, so slightly out of date, but I don't think that alters it much. And the other is from technology skills on LinkedIn job adverts this year. And on the left, you can see that the main skills that people are still looking for when they do the list of technical, what do you want mathematically, regression, decision trees, clustering, visualization. Yes, random forest is in there, but that's lots of decision trees in one place, if you take it right back to basics. Statistics, k-means, and time series. They're all things I know actually how to do hands-on and not all that new. They're all things which were, when I was hands-on with something like SAS or SPSS 20 years ago, they came with Enterprise Miner or Clementine that long ago. They all date from the early 70s. There's nothing particularly new here or all that. If I say it's not complicated, that's not meaning that it isn't complicated, but you don't need to be a rocket scientist. I think the big difference has been databases and the technology has moved on so much. Some of the stuff that would have turned the lights off in Nottingham if I'd have tried to do it 20, 30 years ago is now possible. And the best story I've heard on that, a guy I spoke to once talked about cars. And in 1970, the fastest car in the world, I think it was a Ferrari Testarossa. It was certainly a Ferrari. I can't remember the speeds or the cost, but roughly it would do 200 miles an hour and cost £250,000. If car technology had have moved on at the same pace as computer technology, that car would now be able to do just over light speed and cost 25p. So the big thing that's made a difference is less we've got great new techniques and more the kit we're using is just so astronomically different. In terms of languages, you get the same thing. Yes, Python and R are now the two main languages people ask for, but good old-fashioned SQL, the IBM guys tool they created in the 70s, still there at 50% in third, nothing else above 30%. So you still got this core, effectively, this core kit, which hasn't changed that much. And yes, you might need 10% of your team to be far more advanced. But for the bulk of roles that a lot of retailers recruit for, the bulk of the team probably aren't going to use too much in the way of advanced techniques. And if you employ people where they think they're going to get frustrated quite quickly. So the core skill set we need for a lot of the roles is this relatively unchanged skill set. The barrier to entry, if you like, on technical, the things we really do need you to know. Yeah, being great with descriptive statistics. Can you look at a data set, divide it up, slice and dice it, work out what's going on in there? Can you see patterns in data? And again, that was something first talked about by John. I can never remember what his name is, Tukey, or how to pronounce it, but he wrote Exploratory Data Analysis about 1962. And a lot of the basic principles are largely unchanged from there. Once you've got that understanding to be able to create a hypothesis and test it, experimental statistics and experiment design is really important. And the only really statistical technique, yes, you absolutely do need to understand some probability. That's pretty much integral to a lot of the day job. Understanding calculus and algebra, if you're going to do machine learning, it's useful, certainly, and not a bad thing. But the extent to which you really need to know it and understand a lot of it. You can argue about just how deep down the rabbit hole do you need to go. So if that was the technical skill set, it certainly made that barrier smaller in terms of how broad could we look and how deep. So once we'd done that, we took a step back and said, well, what skills are we really looking for beyond this technical basis? And we really got into what's been called softer skills, I think, in a lot of areas, and the more personality trait stuff. And talking to HR departments, this is where they kind of got a little bit freaky with me, because I was kind of saying about types of people, etc., and who would we recruit. And my first version was, I want to recruit somebody who is basically the people, if they're stood in the queue in Sainsbury's, are looking in the basket in front of them thinking, what are they buying that for? And what are they doing with that? And trying to figure out what the sort of person stood in front of them in a queue is. And the HR guy's going, we're not sending people to stalk people in Sainsbury's and see if they can do maths. And it's like, not happening. What can you actually do? And we came up with these 5 C's, which were very much the traits we kind of have looked for. So the first one's creativity. And a lot of people, I think when you talk about what roles are creative in organizations, everybody thinks marketing. They think about agencies. They think about some of the sort of web design roles, maybe. Analysis, the data guys in the back, nah. And actually, to me, good analysis definitely needs people to be creative with data. And the example I'd use is I spent quite a while working in credit cards, and one of the most useful data items for a credit card analyst is a data item called balance to credit limit ratio. Basically, how close to your credit limit do you sell your balance every month? It tells you an enormous amount about the type of person, their behavior, their credit risk, etc. Now, that data doesn't naturally come out of a transaction file. Transaction files will tell you where people transacted, how much they paid, to an extent what they bought, how much interest they pay. But that was a new data field, and somebody sat down and kind of thought, how best can I look at this data, and created that. Allegedly, somebody in Fair Isaac in the early 70s. Now, that to me is analytical. It's an analytical Picasso moment. It's the creativity in looking at a data and creating something new out of it. The second one, a bit more mundanely, is common sense, which, as Voltaire said, common sense is not so common. The most common mistakes you can make in data are things like actually not thinking about the data set properly and taking things at face value. And I think almost the what could be Squires' first law of analytics. Anytime you do something that looks really interesting, your data's probably wrong. Check it again, then check it again. And I go back to a couple of examples, really. And one of them was a mistake I made, and one's a more famous recent one. The one I made when I was at Bradford and Bingley years ago as what was the Building Society. We had to build a model on buildings and contents insurance and trying to look at retention on buildings and contents. Who were the high-risk customers? And one of the guys working for me built what he thought was a great model, and statistically it was wonderfully predictive. And I got really excited, and I phoned my boss, and we went to see him. And I should have looked in more detail at the model, because what my colleague said straight away was, this variable is really, really important. It's if you close the mortgage in the previous 3 months. And my boss just went, we can't sell standalone buildings and contents. If we lose the mortgage, we've got to shut the buildings and contents insurance. So it was mathematically accurate, but totally bloody useless. And common sense would have told us that before we made ourselves look muppets. On a similar basis, somebody with a little more common sense at Serco might have realised that Excel had column limits before they actually went and built the track and trace app. But hey ho. I really hope we know one from Serco that I've just insulted, but I do apologise. Curiosity is, is the third one, and I now love the Einstein quote that I have no special talents, I'm only passionately curious. I think where this one comes through to me is I love analysts who don't start by diving straight at the computer. For a retailer, often spending time on the phone in the call center or in a store is massively important, and it's something which is a little trickier at the moment, but it's still a really important thing. And I go back to my time at Boots, and the example I'd give, we had a promotion on nappies, and it was a 3 for 2 because Boots do 3 for 2 as their starting point with everything. And it was working well in some stores, badly in others, erratically in others. And nothing in the core data was really store size, nothing geodemographics, nothing was really coming out as what on earth is causing this. So me and one of the senior analysts, we went and we stood in the store in the Victoria Centre in Nottingham, and we watched the fixture. And we just grabbed ourselves a coffee and stood watching from a safe distance for a while. And about an hour in, we figured out something really interesting, because we watched this one young mum come in with a buggy, small child in a buggy, and to get the 3 bags of nappies, she took her child out of the buggy, she fastened one of the packs of nappies into the buggy, give the kid one to hold, tried carrying one herself, and then had to get out the doors and tried to get on a bus. We kind of dashed out, showed us the badges so we didn't look like complete loots, like who were these nutters following me out, helped her on the bus, and then went and grabbed a coffee. And at that stage, we went away and we overlaid car park data on our store data. Bingo. At that moment, you actually realized that the stores it worked in, where you had good parking, it worked. Where you didn't, it didn't. So if you could just get the bag of nappies out the door and into a car boot, wonderful. If you're trying to stagger out onto a bus in the middle of Nottingham, no. So we were able to talk about whether it would be better to do free online delivery rather than 3 for 2 with some of the offers. But you need that curiosity to go and see what's happening. Communication, I think this one gets talked about a lot under the art of data storytelling. But I do think a lot of there's a lot of courses on offer, a lot of training out there, a lot of quite good books. I do think some of it gets too hung up with data rather than storytelling, and certainly too hung up with some of them being just how to do slightly less shit PowerPoint, which is not really the same thing as storytelling. I've kind of been told I talk in analogies and tell stories anyway, but I did start to, a friend of mine made me think about this the other week, because he kind of asked me when I started doing this, and it probably goes back a long, long time. I spent some time working for what was the National and Provincial, which is a building society that's now buried somewhere in Santander. But in the early 90s, we had a chief exec who, we were slightly seen as a strange and weird organization, but our chief exec, one of the strange and weird things he did was ban PowerPoint. Completely did away with it, even for board meetings, and did away with written input papers. Everything was on flip charts. So to present anything, you had to basically draw up and do it on 6 to 12 flips, which meant that you were pretty much using crayons. You had to draw things, which still explains why I draw things in writing pads rather than write things down. You had to use bullet points, and you pretty much couldn't use that much data, but you had to be able to tell the story. It stood in front of people with basically an easel behind you. It was far more Jackanory sort of techniques than anything else. But once you kind of learn that, you become very much not addicted to the looking behind you and reading off the chart. So I think that art of storytelling, I always advise people on storytelling not to kind of look at data storytelling, but to go away and look at who tells great stories and actually learn from that. There's all sorts of great storytellers out there, and understanding how they put communication together, I think, is more important than the data. We used to ask a question when we recruited in Boots, which was, we gave people some data, oddly, on the baby category. And one of the things that you couldn't miss in it was that Boots had a massively higher market share among single mums. Again, the candidates that were great were people who would dig into, why on earth is that? A lot of it was around presence of pharmacists and that you trusted in stores. I also do a weird thing in terms of SQL testing. We don't really do complex SQL create code tests, but I love asking questions. How would you write how to make a jam sandwich in SQL? Which freaks people for a little while. And then the candidates I'm really interested in start to think, it's like, select bread from cupboard where bread equals brown, and you can kind of see where they're going through the process of working out how they do that, and then you can see how they think, which I think is a really more interesting thing. And the last one, which is collaboration or teamwork, and this is nicked from a book by a guy called James Kerr, who wrote a book on why the All Blacks, the New Zealand rugby union team, sorry, the rugby league team is a bit different and not quite as good. Probably the most successful sports franchise in the world, and he talked about a thing called Wanahu was one of the 15 reasons that they're great. And it's about teamwork and the desire to fly in formation, be of one mind, follow the spearhead, which is very much birds in flight. But what it boils down to is they've got one simple rule, which is no dickheads. And what that comes down to is, when you're hiring people, however good you think somebody is in terms of talent, however wonderful, a wonderfully talented, basically a wonderfully talented dickhead is still just a dickhead. Just do not, however great people are, they'll cause you a world of pain, and don't go near with a barge pole. So if that's who we were looking for, these people are really hard to find. So there's the second part of, and this is a bit briefer to get me to finish in the about 40 minutes, but so the second part of this is, once you've got them, how do you keep them? And one of the things that I've looked at and found really useful is a thing called career anchors. And it's from a book. You can see the book on the screen. The book's well worth reading. I think you can download the questionnaires. It's almost a kind of Myers-Briggs type questionnaire. And what it does is it identifies what the one or two main drivers are for your choice of what should be the appropriate career sort of area. What is it you get job satisfaction from? And I've used it as part of the course I've run on leading insight teams for quite a few years. And I've run this partly because I think there's a big shift. Move from analyst to senior analyst basically means you get bigger and better projects to do, but it's the same job. Often what organizations do is promote the best senior analyst into management or leadership role and assume because they're the best guy at the job that they can then do it. For anybody who kind of can remember the 1981 Ashes series, England did that with Ian Botham and it worked really badly. And then Mike Brealey got the job as captain, who was nowhere near as good a player, but England win. A more modern analogy, if you think about football, Jurgen Klopp was not a really good player. He was a fairly average second division German player, one of the best coaches in the world. You don't necessarily need to be a player to be a coach. But I use this to talk about to understand what were the drivers for analysts. And what was really interesting, and I think it explains that why do people struggle with the first leadership role, there's 7 drivers under the career anchors: managerial, technical, autonomy, service dedication, lifestyle, and the 2 that are up here are job security and entrepreneurship. What always came out was only 10% of the people who completed this exercise picked managerial. So actually, analysts very rarely want to run the world. They don't really want to be the CEO. It's not their driver. And this is where a lot of HR training for stepping up to leadership fails analysts, because it assumes you want to run the world. What the 3 main drivers used to be, and roughly this would be a kind of 40-40-20 split, was either technical, where people want to be the best analyst, and you don't really want to put them in a managerial role. You want to create space for somebody to be a principal analyst, for somebody really to be the technical guru in one area. So ensuring that people with a technical driver have got that headroom to develop is enormously important for some people. And historically, I'd say that that's still important in terms of motivating analysts. It comes through in terms of the importance of training and development. Often people assume data scientists leave because they want money. Generally, they'll go for more money once they go, but they go because they either don't like, they're being badly led or badly trained, I think is the two things that they are not utilized correctly. So not being given enough stuff to stretch them and not being given the training opportunities. And that really comes through in that technical desire. The second one was autonomy, which is, and this is the one which the box I tick, the first management role I took because it was me or one other guy looking for a promotion. And I sure as hell didn't want to work for him. I wanted to do my own thing, to go off and own stuff and own the problem. So the further you get promoted, the less people can tell you what to do. So kind of a blunt description of it, but that wanting to be given your own projects and let get on with it. And I think it's still a steer with analysts in teams. There's an old kind of one-liner from somewhere, which is that you can tell somebody what to do, or you can tell somebody how to do something, but don't tell them both at the same time. And even if you think about sort of anything, the worst thing you can be doing is told that you've got to go out and sort out the garden shed or something, but then somebody watching you kind of going, have you finished that yet? It's like, bah, horrible. So basically do one or the other. And that autonomy driver is give somebody the problem, but then let them own the problem. And for lots of people, that is really important to them being happy. The third one in there was service dedication, in that lots of analysts just really want to actually help people in organizations, and they want to help them do a good job, which is really wonderful and makes actually working with analysts a pleasure a lot of the time. But the biggest change, and this comes into some of the COVID stuff, is over the past 3 or 4 years, I've increasingly seen the lifestyle drivers start to be predominant, and particularly among first job, as if you like, or the younger end of the analytical community. Lifestyle is now significantly the biggest driver for what people are looking for. And this is even pre-COVID. But people are looking for things like combination. It could be working from home. For some, it was, I want 2 screens, simple like I want 2 screens in the office. The one that pets at home can do admirably. I want to fetch my dog in the office. Yay, absolutely, yeah, pets, you can do that. But it's all things about working environment and working style. Also slightly tied into, am I working for an organization that's doing things I can brag about? But they want to balance that lifestyle. And I think to sort of finish on the COVID point, I think what COVID has meant is we've now crossed a Rubicon with this to prove I can do something a bit classier than Lego on a slide. This is the Renaissance painting of Caesar crossing the Rubicon. For anybody who's wondering what on earth that is, that's the bit where Caesar was going to take over Rome, and the Rubicon is a river in northern Italy. And that's the bit where he looked behind at his men and told them, if you're coming with me after this far, we're committing treason and you're going to get crucified if we don't win, which is a really nice way of saying you might as well put everything into it if you cross from here because you're done for anyway. But it worked as well. But I think we have now, COVID's meant we have crossed a Rubicon with this, and the genie is, if you pardon the mixed metaphors, the genie's out of the bottle with a lot of things like working from home. Organizations that would have gone, well, yeah, you can work a day a week from home, but I'm not sure about much else. It's like, well, I've done it for 6 months now and the world has not fallen in. Organizations like Google providing £1,000 to their employees to own their own offices. We haven't done anything like that, but one of the last things I signed off on the way out of the office when we went into lockdown was to authorize one of my team to pick up a desk from IKEA on the way home because he didn't have one. But small things like helping in any way with that lifestyle piece is going to be really important. We're now past the I have to be at my desk 9 to 5. I've now got members of my team who will quite happily get up in the early morning and work, but they want to spend the evening playing with their kids. I've got some others who actually have childcare in the morning, want to sort that out, but they'll be on a laptop at 10 o'clock at night. As long as they're doing a great job, I want to help them do a great job. How they do that great job is up to them. And I think increasingly this will be enormously important. Basically, the genie's not going back in the bottle. So if I was to summarize the 3 points I hope amongst the rambling that I've tried to land is, technical is important, but it's a barrier to entry. It's a minimum requirement. the people skills around it are the ones that will separate good analysts from great analysts. In terms of what makes them happy, and how to keep them, training is enormously important. Not trying to micromanage them is enormously important. And the third one, increasingly around the change with COVID, being increasingly aware that for these people, lifestyle is enormously important. And unless we get this right, retaining the right sort of people is going to be impossible. And I think that's it for the slides. So I'll stop sharing the slides, and hopefully there's some questions. Dom, do you want me to look at the questions, Pete?
It was a really detailed, obviously, presentation and a good insight into your experiences as well and your approach to hiring. I've got a question to kickstart the questioning. So, when it comes to hiring, do you have in mind like a succession planning kind of criteria for, you know, whether you're going in at a junior, mid, or senior level, and consider that when you're talking to someone through their communication as well as their technical skills?
Yeah. So the progression and the way I tend to look at progression, it's tied in with the view of technical, really. There's a small number of the team where absolutely you need technical experts, but if I look at, I guess I'll look at three buckets. I'll look at sort of what, so what, and now what. And in terms of how people can do the job, a good analyst will be able to do the what. They can look at a data set and describe what's in there, and be able to sort of do that piece and explain what is going on here. Looking at people who make a senior analyst, it's about people who can go beyond that and do the so what. Why should a business stakeholder, why should a head of marketing, why should a head of trading care about what I've just found in that data? And then the ones who definitely will progress furthest are the ones who can do now what, which is, I've seen this is what's happening, these are the three key things, and this is what I think we should do about it. A lot of analysts are a little bit opinion shy, a little bit wary of going in, and they almost want the traders or the marketeers to be the ones that do the, okay then, so this is what we're going to do next. And I think the guys that have got an opinion are the ones that, where I'm looking and thinking they've got potential.
Yeah, I agree. And just kind of stemming off that, do you, how would you encourage people that are actually looking for looking for technology to work with? Obviously, technology evolves very quickly, and, you know, people want to work with the latest technology. And I heard that you were talking about the way that you write adverts, but how do you encourage that pool of candidates to actually want to come and work for you as well?
I think the key bits of wanting to come and work with us have been less around technology. I think if I go back 10 or 15 years, you'd be interviewing candidates who said, unless you were using, we used SPSS at Boots, and we had some candidates walk away because they wanted SaaS. In retrospect, in 5 years, it was like, well, that wasn't a great decision. And I think it's right, because the technology will always move. The technology will always move on, and you're on a perpetual wheel to keep up with that technology. And if I look at it, the people who, the thing you will get with pets, for example, is we have a fortnightly meeting with our C-suite where we've been talking to them through changes in what's going on, what have we been building, what new analysis have we got, what's been happening during lockdown, etc. And very much my approach is I'll facilitate that meeting, but I don't present anything. I'll there if we get asked really difficult questions or it starts to go pear-shaped for any reason. Fortunately, it rarely does. But I'll put analysts and senior analysts in front of the chief exec, and they get that opportunity for exposure. It's their work. They get to talk about the work. We'll coach them. We'll help them. We'll make sure they're comfortable with that. But basically, you're not having to go through either some sort of account manager role or kind of have your work hidden in four layers of internal bureaucracy where you never even get to see the chief exec and wouldn't recognize him unless you looked him up on LinkedIn. It's culturally that, I think, and I think that's what really engages people and is far more important than we will train you. We will keep you up to speed with technology. We'll support your technology development. We'll make sure you have got the technical skills to be able to do the role. But the thing that will make a difference is is actually that exposure to senior decision making.
Absolutely. I've got a question here from Howard. Well, I've got a little bit of some niceties from him. He's saying that he's the best one he's seen so far. So congrats on the approach to obviously your recruitment and staffing. He says he's seen a lot of what he's talked about younger generations looking for the quality of life, etc. How do you secure training when the training budget's typically zero?
It's a hard one. And it will depend on organisation to organisation. On some organisations, if your organisation just actually gives you a budget for your area, shifting budget into training from somewhere else once you've got the money, which is downright sneaky but works. For organisations that the accounts procedures are a bit stricter on, I've usually tied back training to its impact on retention rates and done the maths around what's a 5% reduction in your basically employee churn, or particularly in the regretted loss rate, and how much is that worth? So how much does it cost you to replace a recruitment, to replace recruiter replacement, retrain them, and not just in agency fees, but in time in the team and in lost productivity? And you can rapidly get to quite a good business case that actually reasonably significant training investment pays for itself. And I've also always used things like most organizations have some sort of variant on a great place to work or a well-being survey. They've nearly always got a question in on, do you have the tools and technology to do the job? Most analysis teams rate that fairly badly, just because, well, they'd be daft not to, because they just don't get bought new kit. But you can usually also try to correlate and tie that back to what's the impact. Most HR departments will believe there's an impact on staff satisfaction, on things like retention and on profitability. If you can tie back, here's variables that then feed into that satisfaction in your area, it all goes to make a good business case.
Absolutely, and I think that's a really, really key point. You know, it's something that we pride ourselves on too. Every Friday morning, we'll have Friday morning training to touch on anyone's, I suppose, any difficulties that anyone's facing that week, but also at the end of every morning meeting and every lunchtime meeting, we'll just touch on any other areas of business. Because I think, you know, it's well worth not neglecting those, because it's not just a training session for one person, it can be a training session for multiple people.
I think it's right. I think the best piece of career advice I've ever got was years and years ago. And I went to the guy who was my boss at the time, and kind of I'd done quite a lot of really good work. And I said, "Can I have a pay rise?" And he said, "No," very quickly. And I got very grumpy very quickly, and kind of got to think, well, what's the point of me staying here then if you won't get any? Kind of went, look, one thing you'll learn as you get more senior is you've got way less control of budgets than you think you have, and way less control of things like bonuses and anything else. What you can control is development. And what he said was he couldn't give me any more money necessarily if I was there in 12 months, but what he did do was say, you should always actually help your people have a better CV at the end of the year than the start. And I still religiously update my CV in December. And the year you change job is the year you can't write a better CV. So my promise to my team is, whatever the managerial side is, if you work for me for a year, you'll have a better CV at the end of the year than the start. And that's some of it's formal training, some of it's about projects and giving them new projects to do. And it ties in with, you speak to the sort of experienced J-Wings, the consultancies, most of them will assume that they've got a billable rate for an analyst of about 75% of their time. They lose about 10% in admin and other assorted stuff, but they then assume there's training and development. And I think that's the sort of model I've tried to aspire to, of if you assume 80% of an analyst internally's job is to do work that would be billable if you cross-charged it, 10% will just be absorbed in stuff that just needs doing, and then 10% should be about development. And I've always been able to almost defend that policy.
I agree. I felt like someone was going to say something before I opened my mouth, because I heard a mic come off, but if you want to say something, say it now. No, fair enough. Qualifications, something that you look at?
It depends. I'm more interested in what people have done than necessarily the absolute qualification. So again, in interviews, I'll ask people, I'm less interested about the technique, I'm more interested about what they've done with it. So I love people who've done MSc projects where they can talk about I've recruited people who've done one on basically shopping patterns with moves to online in Bristol, and they talked about that enormously passionately. But one of the best analysts I'd ever had work for me had a degree in archaeology, and I made the mistake of asking how archaeology was a statistical subject, and she absolutely ripped me a new one. Basically, it's about gathering data, putting it into patterns, analysing the patterns. It's like, right, okay, you're hired. I also used to ask, why did your previous employee organisation employ you? One of the best, you often get an answer of, because I can build models in X, Y, Z, and the technology. One guy, HR, wondered why I hadn't took the interview seriously, but I'd already decided I was employing him after that question, because he turned around and said, well, I build statistics. Well, I helped my employer make £5 million by improving customer acquisition by use of statistical analysis. Yeah, you're hired. I'm more interested in that. Again, the qualifications to me are a prove you've got the right toolbox. I want to know what you can do with the toolbox.